So last week was a combination of fixing a bug for slashing or related to slashing and getting the flow from wallets.txt to the vaults map in the Genesis block such that it actually contained a mapping from rev addresses to integers, or I guess big integers, while before it was um yeah, that's yep, that's my update.
Cool. In terms of doing working on this the sharding stuff, where there's this issue of um, trusting, a shard an entire shard hasn't colluded to defraud, other shards. Um, so if you could get over that trust issue, then you um, could have a greater trust relationship, so you wouldn't have to do this whole um, um, double-sided contract thing, which would allow for sort of a lot more interactivity between the shards. So it turns out there is a straightforward solution to the problem. But I need to check that it actually provides the kind of computational efficiency. What we don't want is that when a shard sends in a transaction, that the other shard has to go back to Genesis block and do a replay on all of the foreign shards transactions. That's not going to be computationally efficient. But what you can do is you can, since the shards, at least the Rolang shards, their state is Rolang programs. So you can take what's called a characteristic formula. So this is described in Kairos' spatial behavioral observations in a logic of pi calculus. So it's where he introduces the spatial style logics, uh, which were an inspiration for the namespace logic. So the characteristic formula is the formula that picks out that process and only that process. It's the only process that satisfies that formula. So what you can do is you can take the characteristic formula of the last finalized block, and you can take the characteristic formula, of the state associated with the last finalized block. Then you can take the characteristic formula of where the thing is now. And then you can check to see that the first formula implies the second formula. And if you can prove that with a theorem prover, then you know that they haven't taken any illegal transitions. They might have taken there's still some risks, but you now know that there've been no transitions that were not according to the Erlang interpreter, right? They wouldn't be able to run a Erlang get from their state A to state B except by taking wholly legal transitions. So that would essentially mean that you're safe to accept the transactions from the shard. Now it could be that the proof takes more steps, or at least as many steps as running the transactions from last known good state to the present, rather than giving you any kind of compression on that. So that's my next step, is to show that at least for an interesting class of formulae here, or states, we are that the proof of that implication is can be shortened to something that's less than doing the replay from the beginning of time. So that's essentially the strategy, and now I have to make the argument that is in fact possible for an interesting set of cases. So that's what I'm working on next. So any questions about that? What the idea is?
And just to get a better appreciation for how that fits into the roadmap, so that would be after Mercury, as we move towards Venus, the implementation of a sharding capable features that what you just explained would come into play towards that point in time, or even after that.
So like essentially some basic sharding is going to go in as a part of what we're calling the Mercury backlog. So it's between Mercury and Venus. So we'll get to mainnet, and it'll essentially be one shard, and then there'll be multiple shards almost immediately after that, because we can do the double-sided contract idea.
Okay, very good. Yes.
Relatively straightforward to implement, but that is the trust relationship between those shards is fairly loose, which is what the double-sided contract is mitigating. So we don't want that. We'd like to have a tighter trust relationship, and this, like, if I can come up with a proof that you can get some computational compression out of this theorem proving approach, then it's something that we can in principle implement inside the Mercury backlog. It just depends on what our priorities are.
Very good. That was helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions, comments?
And maybe a side note, I was reviewing the ArcCast where you presented the annihilation algorithms, and do you see that so with annihilation and being able to regulate the regulation of rates, is that something that's before or after Mercury?
So the idea of having rates is already in, right? Because if effectively, as soon as you have flow governing computation, and you have a market around flow that provides a kind of stochastic implementation, and that was sort of the point I was trying to make before. What I was saying with that RCast is not necessarily that that's a feature that we would want to roll out, but that you could implement a notion of rate and get a notion of stochastic transitions in this other way, and you can use namespaces to program distributions. I'm not sure that we would ever roll that out for the network. I mean, maybe we would, but I mean, there's more work that needs to be done in order to do that. I was simply pointing out that there's this wholly other way of looking at how to do stochastic execution.
Okay.
Regardless of which style you take, there's still, once you have stochastic execution, then you can you can start doing these, you can use these off-the-shelf tools like SPIM to do simulations for smart contracts, which is, I think, a very interesting line of work, and that's something that can be done right away. There's no real reason to hold off on that.
Very good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Unless there are any other questions, I think that's it for the Casper update.
Very good. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Kent.
Yeah. All right. There's a nice RCast coming out today, so look out for it. We're going to be talking about model checking and behavioral types.
Oh, looking forward to checking it out. Thanks.
All right. Sure. All right, guys.
Have a good day, everyone.
Yep. See some of you at the stand-up in a little bit.
Yep.
All right. Ciao, ciao.